When Betsy wasn't at her mother's bedside, she was focusing on becoming an expert at the violin. She wasn't a good student, but she excelled in music. It helped her to come to terms with her parentage. She wondered if she got her musical ability from Norman. Elizabeth made Betsy a birthday cake for her birthday. She knew how devastated Daphne had been for not being able to bake her daughter the cake, but Elizabeth followed her famous recipe. She wanted to be helpful, but didn't want to break any traditions her sister-in-law started. Daphne had forced her body to make it long enough to see her eldest child age into a teenager. She felt so blessed to have done so. Betsy blew out her candles and Daphne silently wept beside her. Her little girl was so grown up and she got to witness one final birthday. Betsy wished to learn more about her father and to be the anchor for her family as they transition into life without their mother. Betsy's teenager trait is that she is self-absorbed. A teenager aspiration is to be an admired icon. She was like her sister Anne, in many ways. Matthew excused himself from the kitchen to cry. He knew his wife's time was coming, and he didn't know if he was strong enough to help her transition to the other side. Still, he put on a brave face for his beautiful wife and asked her to dance with him. She used to love to dance together before the cancer spread through her body. Her body was weak, but her face looked content, and she hummed their wedding song as they swayed. Both savored what it felt like to be in the arms of the love of their life for the final time. Matthew would remember this moment for the rest of his life. They stopped swaying together and Daphne clung to Matthew. He felt her breathe against his neck and then she went limp. Daphne Barton was gone. Matthew begged his wife to wake up to no avail. He laid her on the ground and sobbed against her unmoving chest. He screamed in anguish and pleaded with God to bring her back. He wasn't ready to live in a world without his wife. Betsy was the first to hear the commotion and found her father crying next to her mother. No words could express the devastation she felt in that moment. Charlene joined the rest of her family and sobbed at the sight she saw. It was hard for their family to go from 5 to 4. She didn't think they would survive the loss to 3. Their mother was a beacon of hope and the heart of their family. Even though Matthew was distraught with grief, he tried to maintain normalcy for his girls. He sprayed for monsters under Charlene's bed because she had been experiencing terrible nightmares since her mother's passing. He tucked in his youngest child every night as she went to sleep. He wanted to take her pain away. He knew there was nothing he could do besides love her. They would all be processing this loss for a very long time. Matthew had a very hard time sleeping in the bed he shared with his wife. It felt so empty without her in it. He laid awake in the bed for hours as silent tears streamed down his face. Life felt unbearable without Daphne. Betsy's way of processing the loss of her mother was distracting herself with homework or not dealing with it at all. It was too difficult for her to think about, so she just didn't. With Betsy being the eldest, it was her responsibility to look after her family now. Matthew had insisted that their Aunt Elizabeth go back home, so Betsy was all on her own to make food for them. Her father was a decent cook, but he was too riddled with grief to do much of anything. Betsy had to teach herself. She wasn't a natural talent in the kitchen, but she made do. Nightly dinners were an agonizing affair without Daphne. The entire meal was silent because nobody ever had anything happy to boast about. Had the passing of Daphne broken their family upon recognition? Betsy was beginning to think that it had. Betsy had been keeping her mother's confession about her true parentage to herself for months. Couldn't hide the fact that she knew anymore. She told her father that she knew he wasn't her natural father and hoped he loved her as much as he loved Charlene. Before she could let him speak, she spilled out all of her feelings of the situation. He would always be her father. She knew what her mother did was wrong, but she understood why she did it. And she wanted to get to know her biological father just so she didn't have to question that part of herself. Matthew told his daughter, he loved her just as much as Charlene, because he has never once viewed Betsy as not being his child. He asked that she not reach out to Norman while she was under this roof. It was too difficult for him. Betsy went to her bedroom and cried into her pillow. She was happy that her father has never loved her any less, but was upset that he forbade her from getting to know Norman. She had a right to know who her father was, and she felt she was severely missing out on learning about herself. It had been a year since Daphne's departure from the natural world. Life had yet to reach any sense of normalcy. Betsy desperately needed something different to spruce up her life, so she quit her music class. She had no passion for music anymore. She also didn't want to be home anymore because it was full of sadness. Their family was broken and she didn't want any part of it. Betsy went against her parents' wishes and joined a sport. More specifically, she joined the cheerleading squad at her school. If she couldn't feel fulfilled at home, she would become that girl in high school to feel happy again. Betsy had finally found something she was passionate about. She had already loved to dance, but cheerleading made her feel on top of the world. She practiced every chance she got. She wanted people to notice her. She felt so emotionally neglected at home and sought validation from her peers. This was a pivotal time in her life to develop her sense of self, and she was going to find it one way or another. Where Betsy hid her feelings of her mother's passing from the world, Charlene acted out. She started breaking things and was generally angry all of the time. Matthew did his best to clean up her messes and give her grace. She had lost her mother so young, and she had to deal with that in her own way. He had acted similarly when his father left and knew it would run its course. Fixing Charlene's messes became a way that he dealt with his grief. Using his hands to rebuild things helped distract his mind from Daphne not being there. Betsy became vain after she started high school. Her main objective was to be noticed. Boys thought she was pretty, and she ran with that, wanting to be liked or lusted after began to consume her. She was lonely, and male attention lessened that just a fraction. Betsy tried to be a good big sister to Charlene when their mother was sick. It brought the family together as a unit. After she passed, their close bond dissipated. She made an effort to try to get it back by telling her outlandish rumors she had heard at school. Matthew thought that his loss would begin to heal with time, but the opposite happened. As time went on, he began to miss his wife even more. He would lay in bed and cry for hours, still smelling Daphne's perfume on her pillow. Matthew was both Charlene's punching bag and her sense of comfort. The child was screaming at him one moment and hugging him the next. They became incredibly close during their morning. Charlene needed him, so he forced himself to be there. Their family dynamic became a supportive one. Betsy experienced her fair share of nightmares after her mom passed away. It was the only time she allowed herself to think about her mother. She dreamt of her mother's hugs. They were the best hugs in the world. She missed them so much. Ken Dodson was the high school algebra teacher. He was 24 years old and recently started at Willow Creek Public High School. He was Betsy's tutor for the next few years. Betsy introduced herself to her new teacher before her first class. He seemed passionate about maths, so she was excited that he would be teaching her for the first time in her life. Betsy actually enjoyed learning math. Things were clicking in her brain better than they ever had. She was enthralled with the way Mr. Dodson explained how to solve equations. When Mr. Dodson asked for the class to answer the equation, Betsy even offered to solve it. She was correct about a math equation for maybe the first time. Her teacher offered her praise, and that made her feel smart. Truth was, Betsy didn't know if she would feel so excited to learn algebra if it wasn't for Mr. Dodson. He was young and attractive, and Betsy had formed a huge crush on the man. Not that she would ever tell a soul. Betsy spent her lunch period and after school with her new best friend, Anna Ellis. They became fast friends as they both joined the cheer team at the same time. Anna was kind to everyone and was on the honor roll. They didn't have very much in common besides cheerleading, but that brought them together immediately. They both had the same passion for dance and cheering on their football team to victory. It was all they needed to become best friends. Betsy bought herself a diary to obsessively write in. She wrote about all of the boys that thought she was cute and the gossip that she had heard that day in school. A running theme in her journal was gushing about Mr. Dodson. She couldn't get her mind off of him. She mentioned him at least once in every entry. Matthew tried to ease Betsy of some of the burden of household chores. It was unfair for her to have to take over the role her mother had in the horse. He knew that. She had single-handedly kept their family from falling apart. The loss of his wife was so difficult and he was worried he would never heal. In an effort to bond again with Charlene, Betsy offered to teach her sister how to dance. Charlene was eager to learn, so they began to have lessons twice a week. It allowed the sisters to have something in common once again. They had a long way to go before they would be as close as they once were, but it was a start. Betsy and Mr. Dodson began weekly tutoring sessions for algebra. She had started to fall behind in his class, so he offered one-on-one help. He was very passionate about ensuring that every single one of his students passed his class. Betsy only seemed to understand math when Mr. Dodson was teaching her. He complimented her often about both her math abilities and her cheerleading. He went to every home football game. After a few months of tutoring, he asked Betsy to call him Ken instead of Mr. Dodson when they were alone. He said that they were friends now, and friends called each other by their first names. Betsy felt honored and special that Ken considered her a friend. The semester grades came out and Betsy completed that semester in algebra with a B. This was the first B in math she had ever received. Betsy asked her father if they could invite Mr. Dodson over as a thank you for helping her so much over the semester. Matthew normally would not view having a teacher at their home as appropriate, but he never saw his daughters so happy about math. He agreed to allow Mr. Dodson to come over for dinner. He wanted to personally thank him for helping his daughter so much during such a difficult time. Betsy cooked the meal that she thought tasted the best. She wanted to impress Ken with her cooking skills. She felt that her crush on Ken had developed into full-blown love. She had never had someone care for her the way that Ken did. She hoped that this dinner would convince him that she was mature for her age and was old enough for him to see romantically. She knew it was crazy, but she had never felt this way before. Ken arrived at the Barton residence soon before dinner. Matthew shook Ken's hand and thanked him for paying such close attention to Betsy. Ken responded that she was a bright young girl who could do anything she set her mind on. Betsy called everyone to dinner. She was beyond nervous. Ken commented that they had a beautiful home. Matthew stated that it was all because of his late wife. He got emotional before composing himself. The dinner had been successful. Ken and Matthew discussed sports and politics. Betsy watched in amazement. Her father actually liked a boy that she brought home. Her parents hadn't liked Freddie. This was a sign to try to pursue Ken. If her father approved, everything else would fall into place. Their dinner table finally felt like a family again, and that was because of Ken. Betsy and Ken had their own inside jokes. He praised Betsy for being so witty. He applauded Matthew and his late wife's raising of Betsy. After the dinner was over, Ken offered Betsy a hug. She gladly accepted and basked in the way he felt against her. Betsy shared her secret crush on Ken with Charlene. Her sister was confused because he was her teacher. Betsy told her sister that she would explain everything if she promised not to say a word to their dad. Charlene agreed. Betsy gushed at the personal attention Ken had given her since her first day of school. He was kind to her and showered her with compliments. She knew that students weren't normally supposed to fall in love with their teachers, but she couldn't help herself. She told her sister about the hug she shared, and that solidified her love for him. She was certain that he would be her soulmate. Charlene thought that her sister was crazy, but was happy to see Betsy so excited about something. Matthew began sleeping on the couch. His bed held too many memories of his wife, and he couldn't bear sleeping there anymore. When Betsy woke up the next morning, she noticed her father on the couch. She checked up on him. He was in such a bad way, and she didn't know how to help him. She told him that she was there for him. Matthew didn't know why, but this made him angry. The only person he wanted to be there for him was his wife, and she was no longer there. He asked his daughter to let him suffer alone. A few weeks had passed since Ken's visit to the Barton residence. Betsy had recently turned 16. She knew what she wanted in life, and it was to be with Ken. She knew this could blow up in her face, but she had to follow her heart. She grabbed Ken's head and kissed him. To her utter surprise, Ken did not pull away or recoil in disgust. In fact, he deepened the kiss. They stood and passionately kissed for several minutes. It was everything Betsy had dreamed of and more. She couldn't believe this was happening. Ken loved her back. They would figure out the logistics of their relationship later. For now, she would enjoy the feel of Ken's lips on hers. That night, Betsy and Anna went to the bowling alley. She was radiating happiness and excitement. She couldn't wait to tell her best friend about her budding relationship with their teacher. She was a little worried about how Anna would react to the news. She followed the straight and narrow path and was sometimes a killjoy. She loved her friend dearly, but was unsure how she would take the news of Betsy beginning a relationship with their teacher. Betsy disclosed the details of her kiss with Ken. She shared that she was in love with him, and she thought he was the one. Anna was in shock. Anna started yelling at her friend. She called her naive and gullible. She said that Mr. Dodson was in a position of power over her because he was their teacher, and the relationship was wrong. She called Ken a creep. Betsy argued that the relationship may be unconventional, but their love was real. She begged her friend not to say anything. Betsy left the bowling alley in a hurry. She sobbed into her hands. How couldn't Anna see how happy she was? Ken was anything but a creep. He was the love of her life. She would prove to everyone that their love was real. Betsy kept up with the homework in her classes. She didn't want anyone to discredit her relationship with Ken because her grades were slipping. She was determined to have it all. She would be the most popular girl in school, have good grades, and be with the most handsome boy in school. Ever since the kiss with Ken, he had been more animated during his lessons. He would sneak glances of Betsy and she would blush. Finally, letting themselves express their feelings for each other was the best thing to happen to them. Ken asked Betsy to stay after class to discuss a problem with her assignment. Instead, Ken took Betsy in his arms and began to kiss her and dance with her. He told her that no one would understand their relationship, so they would have to keep it a secret until she graduated in years. Although Betsy wanted to shout their love to the rooftops, she did not want Ken to get in trouble or lose his job, so she agreed. They would love in secret for now. School had once been a place of feeling inadequate for Betsy, but now she felt like it was the only place she could be herself. Ken suggested that she needed even more tutoring sessions, so they met every day before and after school. Of course, Betsy knew this was only an excuse to spend more time together. They would start each tutoring session doing actual work. However, Ken would get antsy and want to be with Betsy more intimately. He was very brazen about his lust for her. For 6 months of their relationship, they only ever kissed. Betsy loved to kiss Ken, It was her favorite thing in the world. He was respectful of her boundaries during this time. Betsy was an average student during this time. She did what was asked of her and no more. She did just enough to not raise alarm towards herself. If she didn't perform averagely in school, her principal may investigate further and discover her relationship with Ken. After 6 months, Ken wanted more. He said that he wanted to physically express his love for her. Betsy was inexperienced but wanted to give him anything he wanted. She felt awkward and like she didn't know what she was doing. However, the way Ken touched her made her feel things she never experienced before. He made her feel incredible. Now, on top of loving him so fiercely, they now had this intense physical connection. Betsy let Ken take her flower. She wouldn't have wanted to give this part of herself to anyone but Ken. He was the love of her life, and they would one day get married. She was sure of it. Ken and Betsy had to get creative during school hours. Ken had yet to invite her to his house due to construction workers building at his house. Ken became so enthralled with being with Betsy intimately that he would send a note to Betsy's classroom at least once a week to excuse her from class. They would lock the bathroom door and be together. Betsy found the idea of getting caught terrifying but also thrilling. She wished they didn't have to hide their love anymore, but their secret added to the passion. Sometimes they would be together 2 or 3 times a day. After Ken took her flower, their tutoring sessions were merely for show. They spent that time kissing and making love. Ken reassured Betsy that her grades looked fine and she didn't need additional help anymore. Some days after Betsy came home, she took a bath to get rid of Ken's smell on her. Part of her wondered if her mother would approve of the relationship or if she would react the same way Anna did. She wished she could talk to her mum about this. The majority of school nights were spent catching up on homework that she had missed throughout the day because she was with Ken. She was overwhelmed by the amount of makeup work she had to complete, but knew this was the only way for her to be with Ken. Her hard work would pay off in the end. Matthew tried to engage with his eldest daughter on occasion. He was still riddled with grief, but his mind wasn't as clouded to life as it once had been. He noticed his daughter was different. He couldn't place what it was. He asked about her life. Betsy gushed about everything she was learning from Mr. Dodson. She said she was in love with someone, but had to keep her feelings a secret. Matthew thought that was odd, but didn't question it. If Matthew wasn't still grieving Daphne, maybe he would have picked up on his daughter's relationship with her teacher sooner. After nearly a year of Betsy's secret relationship with Ken, she went to his house. They were in love and in a committed relationship. It was only natural to see where her boyfriend lived. She was going to make him dinner and show him what a good housewife she would be to him. Ken was shocked to see her when she greeted him with a kiss on the cheek. She gushed about cooking him dinner. Ken was cold towards her and suggested that she go home and they would see each other at school the next day. After begging Ken to allow her to do something special for him, he reluctantly agreed. Betsy had been practicing this recipe all week, so it was delicious for her love. Her mother was an excellent cook and always made sure her family was fed, and Betsy wanted to be like that too. She set the table with placemats that she had made herself. She had planned this dinner down to the last detail. It had to be perfect. She envisioned herself living here with Ken one day. To Betsy's utter horror, a woman came home before she served dinner. She introduced herself as Ken's wife. Betsy played the part of the gratuitous student, and the woman introduced her to she and Ken's daughter. Betsy was absolutely mortified. Ken's wife and daughter played in the living room. Betsy curtly asked Ken if she could speak with him, so Ken told his wife that he was going to show Betsy their beautiful garden. His wife did not pay the whole ordeal a second thought. When they settled outside, Betsy erupted with accusations and anger. She felt like a fool because Ken lied to her. Ken doubled down and pointed out that she never asked if he was married. The topic had never come up. Betsy became even more angry from his answer. She screamed that it was not fair to she or his wife to be stringing them both along. He could only have one. Ken was angry but firm that he wanted Betsy. He had been planning on leaving his wife since the moment he first laid eyes on Betsy. He knew that they were soulmates. Betsy could not in good conscience let this relationship continue. Ken disagreed because all he needed to do was file divorce papers, and then they could be together. Betsy didn't know what came over her, but she actually apologized to Ken for being so presumptive. She knew he loved her and convinced herself that he was simply in a bad situation. Ken promised that he would get the ball rolling on his divorce, and they could soon be together. Betsy clung to Ken and was overcome with emotion. Was she naive for believing what Ken was telling her, or was he telling her the truth? They kissed and Betsy decided to trust Ken. He would get a divorce and they would be together. She was sure of it. A love like they had would work out no matter the obstacles. They returned inside and sat with Ken's wife and child. Betsy felt awkward and out of place next to Ken's wife on the couch. Did she know that a divorce was coming, or was she going to be blindsided? Ken moved to sit in between Betsy and his wife. Sensing Betsy's uncomfortability, he started talking about school and the lessons he was teaching in algebra. Betsy went along with it for the love she had for Ken. Something felt wrong to her, but she pushed that feeling down and played the part. Ken kissed his wife on the cheek in front of Betsy, and this deeply upset her. They didn't look like a couple on the brink of divorce. Ken's wife excused herself to breastfeed their child, but assured them that she was excited to try Betsy's meal. Ken and Betsy sat at the dinner table. Betsy reprimanded him for showing affection towards his wife in front of her. She questioned everything he had told her in the garden. Ken reassured her that he was keeping up appearances so his wife wouldn't take his daughter away from him. He felt nothing towards his wife anymore. His wife, Betsy, soon learned her name was Mary, joined them at the table. Betsy tried to make small talk with Mary but didn't know what to say. Part of her felt guilty for taking a man away from his wife and young daughter. Mary grew sad as she continued to speak, as if slowly figuring out why Betsy was here and what she was to her husband. Betsy felt uncomfortable with the situation, but also felt bad for Mary. Betsy wrapped up her visit quickly by complimenting Mary's home and generously leaving the leftovers of her meal with them. She left without a word to Ken. Betsy ran home and didn't know how to feel. On one hand, she loved Ken and wanted to spend her life with him. On the other hand, he lied to her and had an entire family that he had kept a secret from her. The next day of school was like the night at Ken's house never happened. He did not address it at all, and instead snuck her into the bathroom stall for an intimate moment. Betsy couldn't deny him. She loved him and was sure that this was going to work out. Although she had her insecurities, she chose to believe Ken and trust the strength of their connection. He would leave his wife. Betsy and Ken spent the entire lunch break together in the bathroom stall. They were quiet as they had forgotten to lock the bathroom door, but that did not stop them from being together. Betsy felt out of place when she was at home. Her family did not really know such a huge part of her life, and it was beginning to take a toll on her. She worried herself so much that she started feeling nauseous. Betsy rushed to the bathroom to vomit. She was too stressed out by her situation with Ken, and it was making her ill. Betsy called her best friend to talk about her situation with Ken. Anna was still unsupportive of her relationship with Ken, but would always be there when her friend needed her. They discussed cheer at first to break the ice. Betsy then shifted the conversation to her relationship. Anna was beside herself with anger from what she was hearing. She suggested that Betsy break off the relationship because he clearly wasn't the one. Betsy would consider this, but knew that she loved him too much to do it. She had to see this through.